is the Associate Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs and Vice Chair of the Anti-Racism Task Force. She's a higher education leader with 20 years of experience, and she is in the process of completing her EDD in higher education policy at the University of Minnesota. Her dissertation explores the development of intercultural competence in a sample of first-generation community college students enrolled in a first-year seminar course. So welcome, Melissa. Thank you very much for being our conversationalist. And our second conversationalist is Dr. Sylvie Taylor. Sylvie received her appointment to the MA in Clinical Psychology program here at AULA in the year 2000. She's the founding director of the Specialization in Applied Community Psychology. Throughout her professional career, she has worked with marginalized groups in academic and community settings. She's consulted with over 50 academic programs in psychology and related fields, focusing on curriculum diversification and inclusive pedagogical practices. She's a 2008 recipient of the Outstanding Educator Award from the Society for Community Research and Action of the American Psychological Association. So thank you, Sylvie, very much for joining us. Before we begin, just one word about the recording. As many of you know, we record the sessions, and the idea is to share the recordings with people who are interested. But if you have any qualms about that, please feel free to shut off your video and rename yourself with a nickname. On the recordings, no one appears except for the person who is speaking. So if you're not speaking, you wouldn't appear in the recording. But we just want you to know we want to respect your privacy. Okay. So
does that include those of us in the witness protection program?
Or those that should be?
Or those of us who should be in the witness protection program? I like that, Jackie.
Okay. And on that bit of levity, we will turn it over to Sylvie Taylor and Melissa Kirk.
So I guess I'm going to kind of launch us. Melissa and I are thinking that we could take a little bit of time to sort of update you a little bit on what's happening in the Anti-Racism Task Force, some of the focus of the work that we've been doing. And, you know, once we kind of go through that a little bit to sort of be a little bit more freewheeling in terms of, you know, responding to questions that you may have or things about our work on the task force or in other spaces. I do know that David reached out to me, so you all are going to get sick of hearing from me because I'm coming back to you all in April to talk about decolonization of education and psychology. So that should be great, good fun. But I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about what we've been up to, what we've been doing. Many of you may have seen a letter that we sent out about the activities of the task force. Went out, I don't know, Melissa, a few weeks ago? I don't know.
February 12th.
There you go. Okay. Yeah, a few weeks. You know, I think that one of the things that we've all been sort of weighing as the sort of executive groups. So Melissa, Monique, and I are trying to communicate with the community while we're also trying to get our work done. I think that none of us had imagined the deluge that we would have of people wanting us to respond to things. So I'll let Melissa talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that are coming our way and how we're trying to manage them.
Thank you, Sylvie. So yeah, as first of all, it's so wonderful to be here with all of you. So thank you for having us. I see a lot of familiar faces. I've been to many of these now, and it feels like community and family, and that's a lovely thing. So as Sylvie indicated, yeah, I think we got into this work and we didn't know exactly what it was going to mean being on the task force in general, but also being part of the executive committee. And so we quickly became overwhelmed with individuals and groups sort of coming to us. And in some ways they were encouraged to come to us in the beginning because there was a narrative out there that was coming from a very good place that was saying, hey, you know, the anti-racism task force is going to take care of that. They're going to fix this and they're going to take care of that. So it was really about 2 weeks, right, Sylvie, before we were completely overwhelmed with individual concerns from faculty and staff, issues that were happening in programs or on campuses. So I think before we maybe even defined what we were going to do, we were trying to define what we were not going to be doing. And so to reiterate here that, you know, we're not the anti-racism police, we're not the diversity police. We wanted to get this task force together and really begin to study this issue. So again, that early work was focused on thinking about how do we do this, but also with all these issues coming to us, there were some really deep concerns from people. So that really felt like they wanted a place to bring these issues. Either they hadn't been addressed properly before. So there's a pressure to feel like you do want to fix it and acknowledge it and get them to the right place, and then sort of get on with the work. So again, I think we figured out what we were not. And we've also, I think the other thing is, and this I think will come out in the conversation. I've been hearing a bit, and I know Sylvie and Monique, we talk about this, we meet every Tuesday, and we've been hearing little bits of, I wouldn't say criticism, I would say maybe critique also from individuals from the community, and we welcome that. I think people feeling like, oh, we haven't heard from them yet, we really need a communication, and we really need to know what's happening next, and, you know, wanting to really see action. So it wasn't until, and I'll talk about this a little bit later and turn it back over to Sylvie in a second, it wasn't until we consulted with Dr. Shandani Patel, who is the executive director of NYU's global diversity education program, who basically said to us, you all are going to be pressured to get things done fast and to get things out there, and just, you know, slow down, think very carefully about what you're doing. And that was such an amazing message, because that was all what we were feeling. And for somebody to name it and say, okay, it's okay to take a deep breath and really, again, think through and make sure that we're doing the work right. So I guess I will turn it back to you, Sylvie. That's a little bit about some of the early challenges. And then I think, Sylvie, you're going to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities before us.
So I think, you know, I want to kind of echo what Melissa was talking about. I often bring up in our executive meetings, and I think I've said this a couple of times in the task force, one of my favorite book titles of all time, which was written about the Allende years in Chile, is "We Must Make Haste Slowly." And I think there's an awful lot of pressure to respond. And I think the danger is that we become reactive rather than proactive. You know, we're living in, I can't use the word. So we're living in a time that no one was prepared for. You know, I think along with that comes this sense of urgency that I firmly believe we don't have too many opportunities to do this well. So we're going to opt to make haste at a pace where change can be meaningful and sustainable rather than, let's make it look pretty for right now. And then when we pull back the curtain, it's still a hot mess. So that's, somewhat of our focus. One of the things that Melissa, Monique, and I have been doing recently, we had 2 consultants that joined us for the last anti-racism task force meeting. Courtney Winkfield, who is the senior advisor to the Office for Equity and Access for the New York City Department of Education. And her colleague, Dr. Ruby Ababio Fernandez, who is the Senior Executive Director of that same office, to really do some work they did a listening tour of our last anti-racism task force meeting and then met with us last week to provide some feedback and to sort of help us think about how do we kind of herd all our cats and how do we move ourselves forward. And I think, again, very much in the same way that we heard from Dr. Patel, we were hearing from them also. This is what happens. Everybody, you name something and now where's the result? Things are supposed to change. We did not become the institution that we are overnight. I see this a lot in the community work that I do. We did not become this way overnight. We're not going to fix it overnight. And I think, in many ways, it's going to take certain types of commitments from all stakeholders in the community that some of us are ready for and others may not yet be ready for. So, that is, part of our work also is to be trying to be as strategic and as smart as we can be about making sure that as we move into sort of a phase of planned education and training, that we're doing this eyes wide open to what the potential pitfalls are, and also doing so with eyes wide open to ensure that we do no harm. Because I think that's the other sort of pillar that is important, certainly for me. These are tough issues. They require a level of activism if we are going to talk about anti-racism. I know you all are going to be reading some more of Kendi's work, but if you've seen him speak or read some of his material or read some of the work of others who are in the area of anti-racism, or if we think about someone like Bettina Love, who talks about abolitionist pedagogy, what we're talking about is what are people willing to do? That's the bottom line, because in Kendi's work, you're either a racist or you're an anti-racist. There's no such thing as I'm not a racist. That doesn't exist. So you're one or the other. And for people to position themselves in one of those spaces can often mean some challenges, because if someone is going to be an anti-racist, by definition, that means you have to do something, right? As my grandmother used to say, talk is cheap. It takes cash and documentation to buy land. And you've got to be able to be in a place where you're willing to put something up. So, I think that those are some of that's the soup in which we're kind of stewing right now. So I will let Melissa talk a little bit about some of the education steps that we're taking and training.
Excellent. So as I think Sylvie was saying, just to kind of back up a little bit too, and I know we've talked about this before, to give you a sense of the 6 working groups that we've broken into, and one is education and training, which I'll talk specifically about in just a moment. The second one, there's actually 2 groups that are focused on students. One is around the student journey and the other is around student governance. We've essentially, well, because it's me, Monique, and Sylvie and we've got ourselves spread out on each of these groups, we decided to combine them all, which has actually worked out pretty well. So I'm working with the 2 working groups that are focused on student journey and student governance. The other group is certainly a really critical one that Sylvie is working on is employee journey. And then in addition, we have a group that is looking at transition to schools. And then we have the other group that is focused on the diversity, equity, and inclusion function. So that's sort of the frame in which we're working and how we've broken ourselves into groups. And then the last time that Monique and I were here, we talked about how it is important to sort of build a shared vocabulary, to start working on that shared vocabulary so we can start getting into some of these difficult conversations. And one of the first things that we rolled out in amongst the CCAO group, and that's the Council of Chief Academic Officers, is that they've actually been going through a process called Courageous Conversations. That's the work of Glenn Singleton. And again, that's how do you have these types of conversations? There's a strategy for it. It is a learning process. There is a method to it. And like all this work, you need to be able to practice it. So we're really happy that the CCAO group was sort of taking the first step in that education and training space. And again, this is all about laying the foundation. So we have the working groups and what they're focused on. We have the first piece of training rolling out with the academic leadership. And then of course we have the work with Courtney and Dr. Ruby. And what we believe will come out of that, we have had, as Sylvie indicated, one meeting where they did sit in as a listening tour in our meeting. And then we had a debrief session with them. Now they're sort of taking it back. They're doing a little study on their own and they're going to return to us with some recommendations. So we do hope that in the coming months, we'll be rolling out, don't know what it's going to look like at this point, but some kind of training, some kind of conversations that, again, this whole first year was really about laying the foundation, developing a shared vocabulary, and then working toward some shared goals around anti-racism. And Sylvie, if I missed anything there, please feel free to jump in. And I think from there, you were going to talk a little bit about what we need from everybody here, but what we need from the broader Antioch community now and also going forward.
Yeah, so I think, I think that the real piece as we take this to another level and begin to roll out training and begin to roll out some other things over time is really going to be about what kinds of commitments are the individuals and the various stakeholders in the institution going to step up to do. I think that, one of the things that I think from a structural perspective, that I see the role of the task force, we're temporary, we're not going to be here forever. Our goal is really to, as we talk about what we are and what we are not, as Melissa so nicely said, we're not the diversity police. We're really sort of trying to do the work of identifying policies and practices that exist in this institution that are antithetical to the notion of anti-racism. And here's what they are. Here are recommendations for how they get fixed. And then it becomes a question of what are people willing to do? And, it involves the willing to do involves radical movement on the part of people who benefit from racist practices within the institution and within the culture, because there are people who are served by this. And there are people who are obviously the targets of racism, white supremacy, etc. And I think that one of the real pillars about this that is incredibly important is it is not going to be people of color who are going to fix this. That is not our job. It is the job of people who experience power and privilege within this system to dismantle it. So it really becomes a question of what are people willing to do? And how do we begin to make that kind of transformation? So if you're an educator, it means, how do you look at what you're doing? How do you look at how you're communicating? How do you look at the canon in your discipline? How do you look at all of those things, ask some hard questions, and make some decisions about how you're going to teach in a different way? You know, we've, in the last, year, learned something collectively as a country that people of color have known since the beginning of this place, that there are inequities in healthcare, there are inequities in the education system, there are inequities in every institution within this culture. And frankly, people can't stand around and act like, oh, nobody told me. It's there in plain sight. And people of color have been saying this for centuries. And were it not for, and I genuinely believe this, I always try to make it clear when something is my personal opinion, were it not for the fact that we had two things going on when George Floyd lost his life, i.e., cell phone recording and a whole lot of people who were sitting at home with nothing better to do than to stream media all day long because they couldn't go somewhere else. You know, that's why we had that flashpoint. This has been going on, the lynching of people has been going on for centuries and has been systematically denied, right? What law enforcement has done, you know, for those of us who are in Los Angeles, probably, you know, one of the most publicly discussed issues of police brutality after Rodney King was what went on in the Rampart Division. And that was denied for decades, right? So, and we actually had law enforcement officers who purposely planted things, who murdered people. And everybody was like, the police don't do that. People have known that forever. So I think part of the real challenge now is for people for whom those have not been realities. I think the first step really has to be, how do you reconcile with the fact that it is so? And what does that mean to people's sense of safety, stability, et cetera, right? So I think that's an important first step. And then what are you willing to do? How uncomfortable, you know, and it's not about discomfort. It's not about discomfort. You know, these are matters of life and death for people who are, for whom racism is targeted at who they are. So you have life and death on one side, discomfort on the other is not sufficient. It's just not sufficient. And realistically, until we come to a place where everyone's well-being is tied up in the well-being of everyone else, this stuff is going to continue to manifest itself. So I think that that's the real challenge. How do we do that? And how do we think about that as an institution in our hiring practices, in the way in which we, you know, in the way in which we do all kinds of things, because the inequities are mind-boggling. And when you read, you know, if you are a student of the insanity that is racism in this country, and you read some of the insanity of this, right? That 50% of medical school students genuinely believe that Black people don't feel pain as much as others. I mean, that's insane. That's not data from 100 years ago. That's data from 3 years ago, right? So we've got a lot of work to do. And as educators, we've got a lot of work to do in thinking about what are our practices and procedures in how we teach? What are our practices and procedures in how we admit students or dismiss students from programs or put them on probation or provide financial aid or don't provide financial aid? Or what happens in classrooms, and how do we hear and listen to students who report things that go on in classrooms that shouldn't be going on in classrooms, and how are those things managed? And how long does it take us to respond? And in what ways do we respond? Because in the 20 years that I've been at Antioch, I hear an awful lot about things that go south in classrooms where the student of color who's calling out something that was inappropriate, all of a sudden, what they had to say isn't getting heard because we have to attend to the student who said the untoward thing because they feel badly, and we're attending to their feelings and not the feelings of the student of color, right? So we have to do, there's a lot of that work that has to happen. We have to look around and say, why is it that the majority of our diversity in this institution is at the lower levels? When we look at employees and staff and people who are more temporary, why is it that the diversity is among the adjuncts and not the core? Why is it that the diversity is among the frontline people and not the managers? We have to ask those really hard questions about how we got there. So that's the work moving forward. And I'm going to let Melissa take over because you're going to get that look where she's on a riff. I'm going to keep riffing. So I'm going to let her go on because my hands are going to start and then it's going to be hours.
And it's going to be over. Well, I was ferociously writing, Sylvie, while you were talking, because I was thinking about all these sort of key points and key words that you said. And because my next piece before we open it up for folks to dialogue and ask questions was, sort of why is this an exciting moment for Antioch? And Sylvia, I think you hit on it when you talked about, this is a flashpoint. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the murder of George Floyd and having access to those videos and being home. So it's an opportunity. It's been given to us. We have to take advantage of it and make the best of it, right? So as you were saying, we have a real opportunity here to look carefully and critically at our mission to make sure that we are living it. Some people, I've heard this in a lot in my 1 year here. A lot of people would refer to, sort of the words on the wall and ask the question, are we living up to our mission? So this work is an opportunity for us to look at all that critically and make sure that we're doing that, to be better, to do better. So around those opportunities, first of all, we're super excited to be soon welcoming a new Vice Chancellor for HR. Maria Judith will be, I believe she will become an official member of the task force or in one way or another. And we're excited in terms of what she brings from her experience at Antioch and all the work she's done around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're really excited to welcome her both to Antioch, but also in helping us to move this work forward. One of the things Sylvia alluded to, the curriculum, we made a conscious decision not to have conversations yet about the curriculum. One, because the annual program reviews were going on, and embedded in that is a cycle of inquiry about anti-racism practices and asking faculty, what are you doing, if anything, in this realm? And if you are or you're not, what are the things that you might need? So that is very much going to be a focus of year 2, and that's exciting. I think being able to bring students more into this conversation as this year comes to a close and look to inviting students to actually be formal members of the task force is exciting. And again, just to be able to work together, as Sylvie talked about, with a recognition that our well-beings are tied together. And again, we have a wonderful and amazing opportunity here. It's not easy. It's certainly hard work, but we're here, and we're ready to keep this moving. So anyway, we could go on. I will stop there. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks to both of you for your introductory conversation. And now is the time for everyone to put your questions into the chat so that we can engage the wider audience in this conversation. And Sarah Beth is going to be the curator of the chat box.
So far, we have had a comment from Clarence, wonderful foundation laid. That was to Melissa and Sylvie. And Lynn replied with a comment. Yes, what are people willing to do? What are the privileged willing to sacrifice for the good of the disenfranchised? These are the deeper, difficult questions, which, as Sylvie said, must be addressed, or it just continues in other guises. In what ways do we make each other our own? Thank you, Lynn. Did you want to say anything else?
So I don't know, Lynn, if that was, if you're asking that as a question, I can, I can riff on that a little bit if you'd like.
I was just responding to how you basically said that. Well, Clarence has actually said that first part, what are people willing to do? And I was adding the how do we make each other our own because of what you said. You basically said that if we didn't do the equivalent of that, you used other words, this is just going to continue, which is so true.
Yeah. And, and I think, there's a piece of this that, I'll take responsibility for being someone who often references words on a wall. Because I think one of the things that is precarious about an institution like Antioch is when you put a mission on a wall and act like it's fact. That's problematic because a mission is supposed to be an active thing. We're on a mission. This is what we're supposed to do. And I think in a lot of ways, we've kind of put our feet up and said, yeah, that's who we are. And, realistically, when we think about all things human diversity, things evolve, things change, things, people transform, people's experiences are transformed. So a mission of an institution needs to be living, it needs to be alive. And as stewards of that mission, why I have phones ringing, as stewards of that mission, we need to be making sure that we are living up to those lofty goals.
So Clarence has his hand up. Are you raising your hand in response to what Sylvie just said, Clarence?
No, I just had a couple of questions and a general statement.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I'm really impressed because I was very concerned when the task force started. And then of course we had one report back, and it's a huge task to begin with. And I just love what Sylvie and those have laid out to us in terms of the foundation of it all and how they approach this, impossible work. And as a student, I've been around for a couple of years now, probably feels like 50, but just a couple. And one of the things that I have done as a student is I've tried to keep my head, as they say, tucked down and moving through. And I listen to everyone. When I say everyone, I mean students, cohorts, professors, staff people. And I hear the good, the bad, the indifferent. And I just store it on a chip in the back of my brain because I can't react to it unless I'm faced with it, point blank. And there have been a couple of occasions where I've heard things and sure enough, it did show up. And I went, oh, that's what they said. But what I realized was there was no central place you could go to if you had a complaint or concern. And so now we have this task force and they've been charged with this mission. And I know that all the expectations are that they can fix everything, they can do everything, and that's impossible. So what impresses me in this moment is the groundwork you guys have laid and how you're approaching this. And I know you've laid out these tenets and these pillars in your approach, and that's wonderful. I'm a little bit confused. I want you to explain to me and everyone else what you meant by the transition to schools. I'm just not quite clear on that. But I also wanted to simply say, I'm so thrilled that you created your own language to do this work with, because I think that's important for all of us when we are approaching this monumental work, that we all are speaking the same language, we're all on the same page, and that way maybe we can at least meet some common goals. So I'm just curious, but I'm also very grateful that you guys are making some headway, and not too much pressure is being laid on you to actually deliver results right now, except for to fact find and bring forth all of the ills and the necessary questions on how we can all do better.
Melissa, do you want to talk about schools? Because I think you're probably better at this than I am. So I'm going to punt to you.
I caught the ball. So Clarence, thank you so much. And the first thing I'll say, when I just started to snicker when you said nobody's pressuring you to deliver results. That's absolutely not true. But
I know that because everyone's expectation is that you're going to fix it, you're going to fix it, you're going to fix it.
Right. And you know what, in a way that's good. You know, I mean, I'm actually happy that people have high expectations, but we're conscious of that and not wanting to let people down. So we're trying to balance that every day. The schools piece, if you're, and probably you're not hearing too much about this as a student, but we're in the process of having conversations across the university about how we're going to organize. So right now we're organized predominantly by campus, location, or program. So there is some discussion over the next couple of years about campuses wouldn't go away, but we would be organized differently by schools. So there is a specific group that is working on that, so that if and when that happens, again, about 2 years down the road, when that transition is complete, that it is done thoughtfully and carefully. And as we're laying this work and this foundation for anti-racism, that anti-racist practices are built into that transition as well. I hope that helps, Clarence.
Indeed, I'm excited about the educational piece, mainly because I don't want to be dogmatic in this situation, but I remember my mother is an educator, because when I was growing up, we got hand-me-down books from the white schools. So they were raggedy and torn and had old. So it takes a brilliant teacher to really supplement the content. So I'm hoping that as our professors approach their work in the coming, semesters, that if things are missing about Asian people, if things are missing about Latinx people, if things are missing about Black people, that they have the ingenuity to go ahead and supplement those thoughts and introduce material that can help people take a broader view on the direction they're trying to go in that subject matter.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thanks, Clarence. I appreciate your comments, as always. I'm sorry, folks, my chat is all getting stuck and it seems like a stall. So if I miss something, please feel free to say that. Sherry has a comment. What is taking place in the two groups focused on students? Thank you. Sherry, do you want to say more?
Just a little bit. Hi, thank you. Hi, Melissa and Sylvie. I would like to hear, can you tell us what's coming up in those two groups? Melissa, I think you said you're present for the, what are we hearing? Or is it a case that you're hearing from students or hearing about students from others, etc.? And what are you learning?
Sure, great questions. And if I miss any piece of that, feel free to nudge me. So again, those two groups, we've combined them together. I think I'm looking around who is here, and I have Asa Wilder's here. He's on that group as well, so he can jump in if he wants to add. He's got his thumbs up. So we're looking at two pieces together: student governance and the student journey. So again, we are looking at the student journey literally from the moment that students make their first connection with Antioch. So that could even be through the marketing process, through the admissions process. And again, thinking, what does that look like for students from that first point of contact all the way through their courses and their program? through to their alumni status. So what is it that we're doing, or what is it that we're not doing that is welcoming and engaging and supporting and inclusive of all students? So we're really taking a close look at that. And where we've identified, or where we do identify issues, we will address them and make sure that that's our practices and policies and procedures are equitable across the university. The other piece, which is very much tied to, in part, the reason that we didn't have, that we specifically chose not to have students on in this first year, is that we don't have a university-wide student governance structure. So we are talking about that. Now we do have examples of it across the university in different pockets. There is a student government, I don't know if that's the proper term, but there is a student governance process at New England. There are student groups and organizations at Seattle, in LA. It's very different. So we've just been having these conversations. What do we need something around that? I have come from institutions where, students have been very much a part of the shared governance. That's just my experience. And it was always a very positive one. So we're looking at all of those pieces. And then Sherry, you asked something at the very end, and I don't know if I captured it. Did I get everything?
I think I asked about actually any direct contact
Yes.
between the committee or the groups and students, and I think, and I learned that that's something not yet occurring, and yet would you still speak to that in terms of
Absolutely.
of possible what's in the what's being cooked up for the future?
Absolutely. Thank you for reminding me, because that's incredibly important. So one of the things when you send out these letters, these communications to the community, you sort of wait and you see what comes back. We did get a communication from a student in Seattle who very beautifully and politely sort of pushed back on, hey, I don't agree with this approach of not having students involved. So we wrote back to that student immediately, and we'll be happy to share with all of you what that correspondence was. But what we committed to, and we are committed to doing this, we haven't quite figured out what the vehicle will be, but we do want to make our way around to all the campuses before the end of this academic year and have some kind of town hall meeting with students so that we can get some direct feedback from them. And then in all the other places where that might take place. But we do plan to schedule those formal sessions. And I do believe at some point, and Sylvie can speak to this as well, when we get to a point where we might be doing some kind of a climate survey, that would be another vehicle. But in this very first year, we do want to get around and make sure that we are speaking directly to students and hearing from them about what their challenges and concerns are.
To riff off that, Jess asked, what would you tell students to do when they stand up to racism in classrooms and are penalized for criticizing their teachers? Jess, do you want to say more about this?
Oh, she said no, thanks. Okay. I think that might be the Jess that I know. And have had some conversations with. This is a really important question for students. Actually, it's an important question for all of us. Jess, I would say, and again, I have a lot of students contact me directly. Students are more than welcome to reach out. I always write back. I always offer to connect. But one of the things that I would suggest is, and again, you have to give me a little space here because I'm going without context, but generally speaking, if there is an issue in the classroom and you don't feel comfortable having that conversation with the faculty or don't feel safe with that faculty member, the next thing is to take it to the chair, the program and or the department chair, And from there, you can certainly seek support from the provost. You also have the student services folks on the campuses. So in some cases, students may go to student services if they feel more comfortable there, and a student services professional would be able to guide you. But bottom line is, we do want you to come forward and talk about this. And we do want to address these issues, and make sure that the classroom, just like every other space, whether it's virtual or in person, is a safe space for students and for everyone in the Antioch community. And Sylvie, you probably, I'm sure, have something to add to
Oh
that.
yeah, I definitely have stuff to say. I think that the reality, and in the 20 years I've been at Antioch, when we were live, I would have a parade of people in and out of my office talking about issues that come up in classrooms. And I think for students, I think one of the things that is so important is to recognize that something can happen in a classroom and the instructor might minimize it. Something, then the student goes to the chair or to whomever and it gets minimized again. And then it goes on up the chain, and either we are slow to respond or we don't know how to respond. And my experience has largely been, when we don't know how to respond, we don't do anything. So I think that the real challenge here is, how do we push the envelope? Because to be honest with you, to give you several examples, I'm not Jewish. I don't get to call out, I don't get to define what's anti-Semitic in someone else's statement. I might recognize it, but I don't get necessarily to define it. And I think one of the experiences that a lot of our students share is that their narrative gets rewritten. You're overreacting, the stuff that people hear all the time. You're overreacting, don't make such a big deal, everybody needs to make nice, blah, blah, blah. That is not what anti-racism is about. And I think part of it has to do with training, part of it has to do with fear, part of it has to do with the messiness or the discomfort of it. But until we can engage in discourse where we can look at a situation, call it inappropriate because it was, not marginalize the person who said this happened and it was not okay, and then have real ways. And I think in most cases, what needs to happen is we need to re-educate the people who are in charge of those spaces. And that is pushing up a boulder up a hill, because all kinds of things happen in academia that protect that behavior. Academic freedom, blah, 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 protects people from things that they probably, if it were directed at them, would balk at. And I think that's one of the real core difficult challenges. My advice to students, and this is not my first rodeo, you got to talk to other students and you got to find out who are the people who are willing to step up for you and support you. Because I think part of what often we need first and foremost is for somebody to acknowledge that that was messed up. And that is not okay. And more often than not, that does not happen, because everybody's worried that somebody's going to get sued and blah, 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 blah. That's kind of often the narrative. So you never admit that something was untoward. And sometimes that's all you need, right? Because if we talk about what people need to learn, I think one of the realities for people, anyone who's marginalized in this society, but if we're talking specifically about race, I think one of the things that is absolutely crazy making is the not being able to be 100% certain that it was what it was, because everybody's denying what it was. And that is one of those circumstances that has to do with the status stress of being a person of color. There's this crazy stuff going on, and the people in power are just going to keep denying that it ever happened because of the words on the wall or whatever, or, you know, I'm not a racist. You can't, some of my best friends are, fill in the blank, whatever that is. So I think when we ask, what can people do? The first thing that people can do is stop and consider, what if that is what is going on in that classroom? And then if you're a faculty member or a department chair or a provost or anyone else in the institution, if that is a fact, then what responsibility do you have to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore? And that is ultimately the really tough conversation as it relates to students. And that, you know, I've, like, you know, in that little introduction, I've been all over the country to psychology departments, big and small, through a departmental consulting service, through the American Psychological Association. I've been to 50 departments. I've only been to one where that was the lead. They have a series of questions that they have for a faculty member, a dean, a provost, a program chair, that they are expected to run through in their head. And the first question is, I need to, what happens if I consider what the student is saying as a statement of fact? Now, what do I do with it? Because it's very, you know, we tend, because we live in the societal structure that we live in, people with power and privilege get to rewrite the canon. They get to rewrite reality. You're overreacting. They didn't mean it. You know, that's part of why we are where we are. So what would it mean if, instead of doing that, one had to entertain that when somebody says this racist thing was said in my classroom, that the person that they're speaking to would have to take it at face value? What would that mean? In most cases, people's hair would catch on fire. So we're not going to, you know, that's why we're not doing it. And I think that is the challenge. But I think for students, you've got to find your allies. You've got to find your support. You've got to find the people who validate your reality, because it's crazy making to live in other people's denial. I hope that helped, Jess.
Jacqueline had some more words on this topic. One consideration would be to maintain solution vocabulary versus feeling as if there are drawbacks. Is it important to hear what corrections will be made, when and how? Timelines are the questions for those that are monitoring what is happening. Jacqueline, do you want to say more?
I don't know, following Sylvie, she pretty much hit the nail on the head. It's a matter of the vocabulary that she is using, just to follow up with what she's saying, changes the conversation, changes the narrative to actually come up with viable solutions that aren't that difficult to put into place and for people to understand quickly. So that's why I have that question. I know we have training that's supposed to take place, and you're trying to find what those solutions should be, bringing in outside people and immediate staff and HR that are working on projects. But some things are as simple as black and white, and simple as saying, this is not kind, change it, fix it, stop it. And so those are the kind of things that the students have to deal with, and the process that they have to go through is lengthy. You know, just what Sylvie explained to us is a lengthy process. And in the meantime, you have a deterioration of a student with no recourse. And we haven't had the services of health services or mental health services readily available because of our certain situation. So it kind of makes you wonder, in the meantime, while we're trying to figure this out, what's going to happen to our students? What's going to happen to our retention? What's going to happen to our recruitment process? Because students are going to talk to other students and say, hey, they're not addressing anything. They have it 2 years, 3 years down the road. What are the things that we can have as solutions and part of a positive vocabulary that's a little bit more immediate? That's kind of what I was asking.
You know, and I think your point is so well taken, but I want to also, I want to use some stronger language. I'm not going to go foul on you, but I want to use some stronger language. These processes are dehumanizing to people. You know, Bettina Loves writes about spirit murdering. When that stuff happens in a classroom, people's spirits are being murdered when we act like it wasn't a big deal. So, you know, that's part of what are we all supposed to do? You got to ratchet up what it means. This isn't just a little, you know, offense because I didn't like your shoes. You know, when racism manifests itself, it is designed to dehumanize people. That's what's going on. And we have to call it for what it is. We can't sugarcoat it and, you know, and that's what happens, right? That's why it persists, right? We live in a country where half of the people that run this are in absolute denial that we have systematic oppression built into the structure of the way this place runs, and every institution within it, including Antioch. So I think we have to get to a place where we have to use tough words and hard words and hurtful words, because no one wants to dehumanize someone, right? If you asked a polite intellectual, of course I wouldn't want to do that. Happens every day, happens to 4-year-olds in preschool, right? So I think we have to begin to move to a place, you know, I was having this conversation in a class with my students the other day, and I think I'm approaching one of those milestone birthdays this year, and a friend of mine talks about you get to embrace your broaddom, and I'm getting ready to embrace my broaddom and be people who know me know I'm direct. I'm doubling down on being direct at this point, because you know, I've been in higher ed now 35 years, and we're having the same damn conversation we were having when I started graduate school. It's the same conversation. And there is something that is spirit killing about that. You know, we've bandied around words, like we didn't talk about microaggressions and intersectionality, but it was the same conversation, just different language. So I think, you know, there comes a place where we have to call it for the treachery that it is, and stop trying to make people comfortable. This is uncomfortable. So I was having this conversation in my class the other night, and, you know, a student who in a particular interaction was someone who held a lot of privilege, who was saying, this is so hard for me to hear. And I said, these folks are talking about life and death, and you're talking about the discomfort of hearing words. They don't compare. So get ready to hear some words that are hard to hear, and you have to, because that's the penance of unearned privilege. Because people who have power and privilege in our society didn't earn it, they inherited it by birthright. Right? So, you know, what is it? What's his name? Warren Buffett talks about the genetic lottery. You know, who were you born to? None of us have control over that. But who we were born to, in many cases, creates that trajectory for us. Either creates opportunity or makes it not even within reach, or makes it very difficult to attain. And I think we have to really, you know, we have to really begin to use difficult, tough language to describe what this is, because that's what it is. You're killing people's spirits. It's systematic dehumanization of other people.
Okay, but my question was, what is the recourse for students? Now that we've had the vocabulary and the discussions and all of it's in the bag, and the student has, for the students that are on the line right now, that are currently going through something, because all of this vocabulary is being pushed into the future. What are the students that are going through these situations right now? What are they supposed to do? And I would just wanted to see if there's somebody that can address that, because some of them might be in this session. They want to have a little bit of an answer that helps them with an existing situation. That was my question.
You know, I'm going to be honest. I don't know if someone else can speak to this. I do not think that there is anything that exists anywhere that predicts what the outcome will be. I think it, you know, and I think that that's unfortunate, because I think it depends on where it happens, with whom, who was there, who they talked to, who the recipient of the information is. I think all of that is, you know, very fluid and determines whether an outcome is good, bad, or indifferent. And I think that that's incredibly problematic. So I, you know, Melissa, you might want to talk about what the task force is discussing, the subcommittees.
Yeah, well, I do know, I'm looking at the time and there's two things. I would absolutely be willing, I mean, we usually stay on after the hour. I'm willing to stay on and talk to students who want to stay on. People, I'll put my email in the chat and folks can reach out to me directly. I can speak to this generally, but it's a little bit hard to give specific guidance when I don't know what the situation is. But the bottom line is, if folks, if there are students on the call now, students anywhere in the system that are experiencing this, we do want, this has to be addressed. This has to be tended to. So there's a couple of ways that you can go about it. It depends on the situation, but the grievance procedure is one of those. That is something that's out there on our website. And again, I think, as I'll reiterate what Sylvie said, it's really important to find those allies. So again, if you don't feel comfortable with the faculty member, you go to the chair. If you don't feel comfortable going to the chair, you go to the provost. If you don't feel comfortable going to the provost, you go to the student services people. You can reach out to me directly. You know, we need to know what these issues are, and we will definitely help to rectify them. And again, I'm happy to hang around and talk to anybody who needs specific guidance, if that's helpful. And I don't mean to be vague or to belittle this, but it's really difficult without knowing a little bit more. But we do want these issues to come to light, and we do need to address them 150%.
And I'm available to hang around as well. So if, you know, if anyone finds that useful.
I want to thank both of you for that offer. I think that's very important given the direction the conversation has gone. And I want to acknowledge also that we are over our usual 5 o'clock transition time, but so those of you who need to leave, of course, we understand, but others who want to stay and continue the conversation, we will continue in a sort of smaller group setting. I know that there are a lot of questions that have been posed that we haven't gotten to yet. So
happy to try and get to those too, Kirsten.
Yeah, okay. Okay, and I just want to add that as I listen to this conversation, it does seem to me that the issue of racist or insensitive comments or incidents in the classroom seems like a very high priority to address. And I'm not sure where that falls in this series of working groups, but I would like to know that there is a clear way that Antioch is addressing these. So let us continue then with our conversation questions and with our our
I think
time.
the consensus is that we double back to those 3 questions that never got answered, and then I have something to add on the student perspective after we do that.
Okay, so Clarence, I see David's is next. Do you see one before that?
Your eyes are probably better than mine.
I don't know that. Okay, so David said the
Yeah,
question.
David's question and then Robin's question is what it says in the chat.
Okay, so the question, what are you willing to do, is an important one. When it stops there, however, it seems abstract to me. How do we determine what's on the table? What specifically needs to be done? Does the Anti-Racist Task Force have criteria for determining what they first want to focus on as we make haste slowly? David, do you want to say more?
Yeah, I briefly, one, I just want to thank Melissa and Sylvie. Especially want to thank Sylvie for her answer to that last question. I think that's really, really important, and students don't hear it often enough. So I appreciate that. I had actually planned on, giving my time to Patrick and Patrick's question. I don't have anything to add to what I asked. I just, where are we, right? I keep hearing in the messy conversations, so what are we willing to give up? What are we willing to sacrifice? And never, well, what's on the table, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how can we make those decisions knowledgeably, strategically, if we don't have a common sense of what's on the table and how we might make our way forward? I very much appreciate the making haste slowly approach, but are there criteria that are determining what's going to be on the table first, or what's going to get the most attention first?
Well, I guess I would say, I'm going to give you a terrible answer. I think everything is on it, right? Because I think, when we think about anti-racism, it's not the absence of non-racist things, right? Like, I can't tell you how many students of color have said to me in classes since this pandemic, you're the first instructor I've had who's acknowledged how devastating this has been in my community, and who's asked if I'm okay, and if my family and my loved ones are okay.
Sylvie, it's hard to hear you.
Thank
you. That's better.
Is that better? You hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that that everything is on the table, and I appreciate, I saw Patrick, I saw your comment, and thank you so much for that grounding, because, I certainly think that, those of us who are in leadership on this task force are certainly very much aware of, we actually had a conversation about this a week ago or a couple of weeks ago, exactly about that, how much we are in precarious positions because of this. And it's not lost on us that, the leadership of this task force is women, and, there's all kinds of things there. And, recognizing that the people in power will wield their power.
Yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in, I just want to share a quick story with that. In 2015, I was executive vice president of a college of about 15,000 students, and we started this journey. And when it got to the point where real things started bubbling up, the higher levels, the president of the institution, there was 3 colleges in the system, chancellors, vice chancellors got really uncomfortable, especially when it came to what came up from students. And they kind of started a campaign along with some of the senior faculty to kind of squash it. And they used the HR methods to squash it, particularly the evaluation process within departments. You can really, take off of their work, but things like teamwork, collegiality, those things like that, how you work with your department, people start getting dinged on those kind of stuff. And it put some people up for tenure of jeopardy. And that really kind of cooled the movement across the campus. And so I just want us to be aware of things that can happen. And I say this every time, but as much as energy as we put into it, there's going to be that much of a resistance. And Power is a hell of a drug. That's been the comment. And so I just want people to be really aware. I mean, I've been at levels and seen the conversations, and people have told me just be a team player. Don't really push this. You're one of the good ones type of deal. And so I just want people really to be aware that this is a contact sport. This is not for the faint of heart, and what can happen when you bring these kind of things up.
I mean, I can only speak for myself personally. I know that when I enter these kinds of spaces, my job is on the line. I have no illusions about that whatsoever. And I also have no illusions that there's anything that will protect me. Because there isn't. Short of, doing what everybody does in this culture, with lawyer up. So I personally go into this eyes wide open. But thank you, Patrick, for reminding me.
And Sylvie, I'll add to, and Patrick, my eyes are wide open as well. And I would say that without saying too much about the executive committee meetings that we have and all the conversations that we have there, I think we are all, and can't speak for Monique because she's not here, but I think we're all keenly aware of exactly what you said, Patrick. And at the same time, it is just very clear that we are already, and we will continue to uncover things that are really uncomfortable. I believe strongly. Do I think it's going to be easy? Nope. Is it going to be a contact sport 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Yep. But I know the three of us will continue to fight, and I know that the entire task force is super passionate about seeing this work through. So you have our commitment that we're up for the contact sport. That's all I can say. I got my, we all got our armor on.
The next comment, Patrick, did you want to say more about this? When it's all said and done, the university is a hierarchy, and the people on the task force are employees. When it comes to putting leaders of the institution in the spotlight, I'm afraid they will use their levers of power to derail the effort. Power is a hell of a drug.
Well, one of the things that I hold dear is part of my background is being an Alinsky-esque community organizer. So I understand how to play with power. So I think there's ways in which people in power can be engaged that can kind of destabilize what they think they know. But you're absolutely right. When push comes to shove, and I say this to people, I say this to staff all the time, I say this to colleagues all the time. When it comes down to it, if it's a choice of Antioch University or Sylvie Taylor, Antioch University wins every time. Absolutely. The institution will continue to survive long after I don't work here anymore, or long after they've made a determination that I have served my usefulness to the institution. And I think you have to know going in that that's the case.
As I was saying, I heard, and I'm trying to get it right. The institution is perfectly positioned to sustain itself. Absolutely. And it would do everything it can to sustain itself. Yeah.
Can I go at the risk of not answering David twice? Can I just go back and answer? So David, just to kind of go back and ask about to be a little less abstract. So that is why we have the 6 working groups. The charge that the working, or rather 3, I guess we've split into 3 now. The charge of the working groups is basically to identify the core issues in those categories and make recommendations that we would then bring forward. In addition, one of the things that we're working on, the new VCHR is going to be starting in a couple of weeks. So we are actually preparing a letter that will go from the three of us to identify some of the things that we've already identified. So to the extent that we're finding out things that belong in other places, we're bringing those things forward immediately. Some of the things we're talking about here today with like super pressing and very concerning student issues, those need to be, those we don't wait for the task force to come up with a recommendation. We address those immediately. And then the other things will take some time to filter through the working groups.
Thank you, Melissa. Robin's question has a bunch of fans asking, please make sure this gets asked. Have you looked outside of academia to anti-racist activist consultants to partner with, to help with hiring structures specifically? I'm curious what that would look like instead of relying on knowledge from within the institution. I don't have any further to add on that. Just curious if it has been an approach.
I think we would, most certainly, we're in the process of looking at, who might be appropriate people to do training for different stakeholders. We are not wedded for everyone to be in an education space. I think some of, at least in my career, some of the most talented people in this area are not in academia. So we certainly are not wedded to only people in academia participating in training or informing our work. I think, I think one of the other aspects of this, though, that is helpful when we do engage with people who do come from academic backgrounds is an understanding of the sort of structures and functions of academic institutions, which often don't function in the same way as community-based organizations, as community-based nonprofits, as corporations do. So, that can be helpful in of understanding those roles, but we certainly are not, we most certainly are not wedded to only engaging with people who work in academic spaces or who come from academic spaces.
And to that point, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I just want to throw out the name of Denise Hamilton yet again for the 50th time on Messy Conversations. She's doing that work called Race Relay. It would be fabulous if we had a couple of workshops with her. I know we don't have the funding that USC has, but she's out there doing it for many schools. And I'm sure she would, design something for us. But I just want to declare that if the orange agent who just left the White House doesn't run in 2024, I want to nominate Sylvie Taylor to run for president of the United States. and to that end,
we love you, Sylvia.
I'm going to give you now. See, now it's getting late in the day, and I'm going to, excuse my language, give the smart ass answer that my mother would say. I'm too smart to run for that job. I can't do that.
Well, you didn't have to respond. It can just still be my fantasy.
Okay.
But I want to offer two things. One, as a student at Antioch, and I so appreciate you explaining what our ombudsman approach could be if there is an issue. I kind of backed into Antioch through the Bridge program, and no one ever explained to me at any moment, if I had an issue, how to go and address that. So I appreciate you giving us something of the pecking order to doing that today. My question would be, since I backed into Antioch through Bridge, is the normal orientation presented in a way that students are giving that information? I know I certainly didn't get it in Ed Found. So I would want to know, do we have an ongoing approach to letting students, new students especially, know about how to approach that? And I just want to offer one incident that happened to me, I can only, maybe there are a couple, but one incident that did happen to me, and you talk about mentors, there was a faculty member of color who told me about their experience at a majority white university they went to for graduate school. And they said that, you must remember that wherever you go, you carry you with you, which is something I kind of sort of knew, but hearing it out loud made all the difference in the world. So I'm in a class and the professor gives us this, assignment and told us we absolutely had to use credible media sources. So I looked at the list of media sources. There wasn't one Black publication on that list. And all I could think about was, okay, wait a minute. I work with the National Black Journalists Association. I know Black journalists. I work with Black publications. They're not credible. They're not legitimate. And then I remembered what was said to me. And I said, you know what? I don't care about the list. If I find a source that I want to cite from, then that's what I'm going to do. And I did it and nothing was said. But there was a certain amount of, as the kids say nowadays, shade thrown, but it wasn't acknowledged, like you said. Oftentimes it's not acknowledged. But I offer to you and Melissa, in the hierarchy of things, I always tell people when you have these difficult issues to raise with hierarchy, to put on that Barbara Jordan hat. You know how Barbara Jordan, how she was able to weave her way through the state Senate of Texas and then make her way to Congress. She always made those guys think they thought of it first. So maybe those hard things can be framed in a way that the hierarchy thought, oh, we thought of that. Yeah, we can do something like that. And, I'm just saying, in a whimsical kind of way. It's certainly not going to be that easy.
We have done a little bit of that. Alinsky was always someone who thought that you had to play to people's egos a little bit. So, but thank you for that, Clarence. I do think, in talking about student journeys and so forth, I personally have had conversations along the lines, when I first came to the task force and talking with higher up leadership, I said, there's two things this place needs. One of the things, you need an ombudsperson who is independent, who does not answer to the powers that be, who is the arbiter of what the heck is going on here, and who's well trained in all issues related to diversity, because this notion that it's because even what I described, even what was described, that hierarchy, it's an incestuous hierarchy. So there's a vested interest. I can I have watched things die in people's offices. Something egregious happens, you have a conversation, and then it dies there. It never goes any further. And unless someone who perceives that they don't have any power in the institution, pushes it further, it dies. And that's not okay. And I think if we had an ombud structure of some kind, it would make it much more difficult for those things to just evaporate into the ether. But that's one of those work of a task force that might result in recommendations around those issues.
Because this is being recorded, I just want to acknowledge the last comment that Asa made, which was that Lisa Lepore serves as a student advocate, and she may be somebody that students can reach out to on Antioch email. And before we end today, I want to make sure that we hit number 3 of Megan's ask, because I think we got the first 2. You mentioned that re-educating would be an uphill battle. Are you saying that the instructors at Antioch don't currently receive ongoing education? If so, is there a plan of action to ensure that ongoing education is implemented?
That's an interesting question. I can only speak for myself. I've been at Antioch for 20 years. I've never, as part of my job, had formalized training that had anything to do with pedagogy or any of that, that was formal, that was delivered by the institution. I can't speak for other people's experiences, but, I think, I think one of the things we have to ask about is, is that something that is the responsibility of the institution? Is it the responsibility of an individual professional? I think that's also one of those places where academic freedom and all of that other stuff uh, becomes an issue. I mean, there are canons. There's a lot of work around what does anti-racist decolonized pedagogy look like. I'm going to talk to you guys about that in April. There are guidelines and practices that are structured on how to do that. Recommendations for how that can be done with the content, with whatever content area someone works in. I'm going to talk about psychology because I'm a psychologist. So, but that's just my, I don't know about anyone else.
So I'd like to interject here that in the undergraduate studies program at AULA, we do have quarterly all faculty meetings with all of our instructors. We invite them all and we work on things together. Often we do some readings, and the readings that we did for fall and for winter sessions had to do exactly with anti-racism in the syllabus and in the classroom. So we did the readings, and then, we all gathered together and talked about how we work on these things in our classrooms and in our syllabus. So that's, we tend to do our professional development in a collective way and in a grassroots way, rather than having consultants come in and tell us what to do, because we don't really have the budget for that. But I would just want to put that out there in our space, that there is, I think this happens by units. Some units do things like that, and that's just an example of what can happen, and it's frankly very productive. And I would say that all of the people who were on the Zoom call on Friday talking about anti-racism in their syllabi, they brought their syllabi, and we looked at them together in our breakout rooms. People loved this. They loved getting help on this from each other. So my experience is that our instructors are only too glad to be doing this kind of work and to become better instructors and to embrace the anti-racist agenda.
But I think, I think the point, though, that I think is really important, if these issues are important to the institution, then the budget would be available. Because we spend money on, faculty for sure, sometimes we scratch our head about how we're spending money on things. So, I think that it's important, like, where do we prioritize, right? What's important and what's not important. And, in a capitalist culture, where you put your money says a lot about who you are.
So I would say, I agree with you, Sylvie. And my point is this, that whether there's budget available or not, this is our commitment, and we're going to do what we think is important, regardless of whether Antioch funds some, consultants to help us, and I'm comfortable with that. I like us finding our own problem solving avenues and learning from one another, because there's a lot of knowledge in those Zoom rooms among our faculty. They teach at various other schools, and they bring what they've learned into these sessions. And So it's, this is how I like to work, is if the direction doesn't come from above, we build it ourselves from the bottom up, period.
I think that's one of the themes of Antioch, though, too, is what you just said, Kirsten, that we have to build it. Melissa, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, while I'm not 100% sure what recommendations will come out of the employee journey group, Sylvie, you have a better sense of that. One of the things that we started working on before the task force got started is building a subunit of academic affairs called academic personnel, which is focused exclusively on basically the trajectory that all faculty take. So there is a plan that would include proper onboarding for faculty and then support professional development support throughout the faculty life cycle, the same way that we're doing on the student side. And I believe that hopefully this is something that we can do fairly soon, is to build, as you were saying, Kirsten, an internal professional development structure where we take advantage of the expertise we have across the university and basically have, not that we won't seek outside support when needed, but that we can offer essentially a program of offerings over the course of a given academic year that would be available to all faculty. So that is something that is in the works, and I hope, and I'm imagining will be strengthened by recommendations that come out of the employee journey group.
I have a quick comment to Kristen. And I'm kind of like you, I kind of work like that. Even if it's nothing in place, we should just do it. But the problem with that I've seen over the years is that it's a handful of people that operate like that, and they go do a certain amount of work. And whenever it's, well, what are you doing, as an institution, everybody turns and points to, oh, this is what we're doing. And that kind of becomes institutions' activities and efforts. And it never becomes institutionalized. And that is, I think, the other side, the danger of it. It's always this group of people that kind of pushes and does it. And if it's not institutionalized, once, somebody leaves, somebody retires, somebody, gets married and moves to Bali, live on the beach, those efforts, and that goes, you tell what stuff I dream about, going to Bali and live on the beach. But those efforts go along with it, and it's never, and I've seen that, I've been in a few different institutions, and I've seen that every institution I go to, it's always a group of people that are always doing some great work, but it's always there, and it lives in them. If somebody leaves, somebody does this, all that goes with them. And whenever the accreditors come around, whenever there's a visitor come around, every one of the state senators come around, everybody one that points to, the good stuff the institution is doing, they go run to these people and put a light on them. And then when nobody's looking, they say, go back in your corner and do your thing.
I hear you, and I have such confidence in our leadership of the anti-racism task force that important new directions will come of it. And all I'm saying is that we're not waiting around because I know it's right for you to make haste slowly and be very considerate about your direction. But, we're pawing the ground and we want to improve ourselves in the meantime. So
I don't know. Going to Bali sounds like a plan, Patrick.
That's what we're gonna do.
Don't you guys
That'd
go on
be
a
new Antioch campus?
on retreat to Bali? That would be great.
No, a whole
I'll
campus. Just a campus.
Yeah, we're gonna have a retreat. It's gonna be about 8 or 9 years long retreat.
I'll come along and chaperone.
I don't know if it's still this way. Back when I was much younger and more foolish, I spent a week in Bali and was laying on a beach, and for $5, 2 people were happy to put hot rocks and seaweed and massage my back for a couple of hours at a time. I was like, I got to double the money, so you come back tomorrow. And they were like, no, we won't take it. I'm like, take it. Nobody needs to know. So yes, I haven't thought about that in a while. See, now you've put that in my head. Uh-oh.
So this probably means it's time for us to adjourn and head for our vacation dreamland. But
I'm
let
going to
me,
throw a shameful thanks out there to everyone. This was very fruitful, but I also want to just personally say thank you to the people that came to the book launch yesterday for my first published work, as you can see behind me. So thank you guys for showing up and supporting me.
congratulations, Clarence.
Thank you.
And thank you to our wonderful conversationalists today, Sylvie and Melissa. You're always welcome to come to our weekly sessions, which will begin again on April 12th.
And I think coming, I think on the 19th of April. Is that right?
Yeah, yes. Would you just remind everyone? I know you already mentioned it, but let's just make sure everyone knows what you're going to be conversing about, Sylvie.
To be talking about decolonizing curriculum in psychology and related disciplines. Something like that.
That is such a...
And it is on the 19th.
It's on the 19th. So we're looking forward to that very much.
My jam. It's going to be interesting.
It's going to be very interesting.
The prelude to her campaign announcement.
So I think with that, unless there's something I've forgot to mention, no, David is telling me no. Okay, so with that, we're going to adjourn, and I wish you all a fine end of your term and break, and look forward to seeing you all in April for the Messy Conversations, April 12th. Okay, everyone, thank you.
You.
And can I just add in, as we're leaving, if any of the students wanted to reach out to me directly, they're welcome to do so. I see there's still some students.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Thank you.
Thank you. Healthy, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.